The boy's voice cracked as he screamed, "If we don't bring back money, he doesn't feed us." Mason's tiny fists clenched defiant in the face of a man 10 times his size. Rick, the so-called uncle, reeking of alcohol and rage. Aiden trembled behind him, shielding Leo, whose lip was bleeding again. Rick raised his belt with a snarl, but the door burst open before it could land. In walked Lucas Grant, cold-eyed, drenched from the rain, his voice low and lethal. "Touch them again, and you'll regret ever knowing their names." What Lucas didn't expect the boys were his blood. Some children survive, others are finally seen. Will you stay and witness what love can rewrite? Under a cold, relentless Chicago rain, Lucas Grant stood near the glass entrance of the Grant Tech Tower, a towering emblem of his empire, watching as his reflection rippled in the puddles beneath his feet. His tailored suit clung damply to his frame, despite the umbrella overhead, and the sharp chill of October wind sliced through the collar of his coat. It had been another long day of numbers negotiations and boardroom tension. But for Lucas, that was just Tuesday. At 42, he had it all, or so the headlines claimed. Billionaire innovator, self-made tech mogul, the man who turned a startup in his college dorm into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth. But behind the polished facade, the man was worn down by the demands of ambition. He didn't remember the last time he'd laughed from his gut or sat through a meal without checking a screen. Just as his driver pulled the sleek black car to the curb, Lucas noticed something odd across Michigan Avenue. Huddled beneath the recessed doorway of a shuttered coffee shop were 3 small figures. Children, soaked to the bone, their thin clothes plastered against their tiny bodies. They looked no older than 6 or 7 boys, identical in every feature, yet clearly individuals in their posture and expression. One held out a dented paper cup to passers-by, who pretended not to see. Lucas almost turned away. This wasn't his world. He donated to causes, sure, wrote big checks at galas, but hands-on compassion, that was for someone else, someone with time. Yet something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way the smallest of the 3 trembled under the awning, or how the tallest had a fresh bruise on his cheek. But mostly it was the boy in the middle. He held the cup and looked directly at Lucas, not pleading, not begging, just waiting. "Sir," his driver called, stepping out with the umbrella. "Give me a minute," Lucas replied, already crossing the street. The boys stiffened as he approached, clearly used to being shooed or worse. "Where are your parents?" Lucas asked, keeping his voice low. "They said not to come home unless we had money," the one with the bruise muttered. His voice was flat, as if repeating instructions. "You haven't eaten." The 3 shook their heads in unison. Lucas hesitated. He could call social services. Let the system handle it. But the idea of walking away felt suddenly unbearable. "Come with me," he said. The boys exchanged wary glances. It was the youngest who moved first, stepping forward cautiously. Lucas held the door to the diner open for them, watching as they filed inside, leaving wet footprints on the tile. At a corner booth, the waitress gave him a curious look, but said nothing as the boys devoured cheeseburgers and fries with desperate energy. Lucas didn't speak much. He just watched. "I'm Mason, the one with the bruise," finally said, wiping his mouth on his sleeve. Aiden said the one who had held the cup. Leo whispered the youngest, mouth still full of fries. "How old are you?" "7?" They chorused, then giggled quietly. That sound real innocent laughter hit Lucas harder than he expected. Outside, the rain turned heavier. Lucas checked his watch, nearly midnight. He should have been home hours ago. Home, a penthouse with gleaming floors, silent halls, and no one waiting. "Where do you live?" he asked. Over on Archer, Mason replied. "3rd floor, above the pawn shop." "Who's taking care of you?" our Uncle Aiden said. "Rick." But he drinks and gets mad a lot. Lucas's jaw clenched. He had no proof yet, but the puzzle pieces were falling into place. As they finished their food, the waitress brought the check. "Your boys are precious," she said with a smile. Lucas almost corrected her, but something stopped him. "Thanks," he said instead. When they stepped back into the street, the boys stopped short at the sight of his black sedan. "Is that a limo?" Leo asked wide-eyed. "No," Lucas chuckled, "but close enough." They climbed in the leather, swallowing their small frames. As the car glided through the city, Lucas looked out the window, unsure what he was doing. These weren't his kids. He had no plan, no experience. But then he glanced at them dozing against each other, warmth returning to their faces, and realized maybe for the first time in years that he felt something. Not obligation, not guilt, just connection. When they arrived at his penthouse, his longtime housekeeper, Catherine, was already asleep. Lucas guided the boys inside quietly. He fetched towels, laid out dry clothes from the gift shop stash, and let them pick a couch or carpet to crash on. The penthouse had never felt lived in. Now, scattered with tiny socks and the smell of diner fries, it felt oddly real. Lucas sat on the edge of his bed later that night staring at the city lights. Tomorrow would come with all its meetings, all its noise. But tonight, in a house that finally didn't feel empty, something had shifted. And Lucas Grant, billionaire perfectionist loner, had no idea that this stormy night, this impulsive act of kindness, was about to change everything. The smell of scrambled eggs and toasted bread filled the penthouse, a scent that hadn't graced Lucas Grant's sterile home in years. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a soft glow over a space that was usually silent static. But today it pulsed with the unmistakable presence of life. Lucas stood at the stove in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up, spatula in hand, an image so unfamiliar even to himself that he nearly laughed. Behind him, the triplets sat at the oversized marble kitchen island, legs swinging, eyes wide with wonder at the spread before them. Mason, ever the quiet leader, ate methodically. Aiden chatted between bites, telling stories that made no sense but overflowed with energy. Leo leaned his chin on one hand, watching Lucas, as though trying to memorize every move. "You cooked all this?" Leo finally asked. "I tried," Lucas said, placing a plate of bacon on the counter. "No promises it's any good. It smells like cartoons," Aiden said, grinning. Catherine, his housekeeper of nearly 2 decades, appeared in the doorway, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She stopped mid-step, her sharp British composure faltering as she took in the scene. "Mr. Grant," she said slowly, "I wasn't aware we were expecting guests." It was a last-minute situation, Lucas said, trying to sound casual. Catherine's eyes moved over the boys, their too-thin clothes, their messy hair, the fading bruise on Mason's cheek. Her expression softened. She stepped forward without another word, gently brushing crumbs from Leo's chin and inspecting the kids the way only someone with a heart trained in quiet caretaking could. "I'll prepare something proper," she murmured, already opening cabinets. As Lucas poured juice into mismatched glasses, he realized he'd skipped 3 meetings already. His assistant had texted twice and left a voicemail marked urgent. But this morning, Lucas couldn't seem to care. The firm could wait. The board could wait. He sat down with the boys' coffee untouched in front of him and asked the question that had been sitting on his chest since last night. "Can you tell me more about Rick?" The reaction was immediate. Mason's fork paused midair. Aiden looked down at his plate. Leo clutched the edge of the stool a little tighter. "He's not really our uncle," Aiden mumbled. "But that's what he makes us call him." Lucas kept his voice steady. "Is he your mom's brother?" "No," Mason said. "She died last year. Rick was her boyfriend after she got sick. What happened then? He said we could stay, but only if we helped pay for things. Mason continued, his voice low. He doesn't let us go to school. We're supposed to bring money back every day. If we don't... He trailed off, and Lucas didn't press. Leo added softly, "He gets real loud." The room fell silent. Catherine placed a fresh pot of oatmeal on the counter and gave Lucas a knowing look, one that didn't need words. Something had to be done. Lucas rose from the table and walked to his home office. The second he sat down, the business instincts that had built an empire snapped into gear. He dialed his head of security. "I need information on a man named Rick Douglas," he said. "Lives above a pawn shop on Archer. I want a full background check, any criminal record photos if possible." "Yes, sir." Quietly. "No police yet." "I don't want to scare the kids." He hung up and stared at the family photo still sitting on the corner of his desk, his parents long gone, and his younger brother Nathan with the same smile that now lived on Leo's face. Lucas didn't return to the kitchen right away. He needed time. This wasn't a one-night kindness anymore. This was a responsibility, a choice. By the time he stepped back into the living room, the boys were playing with Catherine's old deck of Uno cards, arguing over whether stacking draw fours was allowed. The sight brought an ache to his chest, a kind of unfamiliar peace. Just as he was about to speak, his phone buzzed again. It was a calendar alert, reminder, quarterly planning with executive team in 30 minutes. He looked at the screen, then at the boys. "Mason," he said, "do you want to go shopping today? Get some new clothes?" Mason looked surprised. "We don't have money." "I do." Catherine smiled behind her tea. As Lucas opened the front closet to grab his coat, the penthouse buzzer rang. He glanced at the security monitor. Monica. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed." "Send her up," he told the desk reluctantly. Moments later, Monica walked through the front door in designer heels, her trench coat dry despite the drizzle outside. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the boys, especially when Leo looked up with a piece of toast in one hand. "What the hell is this?" she asked, her voice sharp but controlled. "They're staying with me," Lucas said evenly. "Since when?" "Since last night. And this is how you spend your morning, playing house with stray children." Lucas didn't answer. He moved protectively toward the boys who had stopped playing, their eyes wide and unsure. Monica's voice dropped. "There's a shareholder strategy session in less than an hour. The board is already restless after the Rome setback. What do you think they'll say when they find out you're babysitting instead of saving the company?" "They're not just kids," Lucas said, his voice calm but firm. "They're human beings." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly." She left with clipped footsteps, leaving tension behind her like a perfume trail. Lucas turned to the boys. "Don't worry about her." "Are you going to get in trouble?" Aiden asked, frowning. "Maybe," Lucas said, "but some things are worth it." And as he watched them gather their things for the shopping trip, laughing again, still shy but blooming with each passing minute, Lucas realized that the morning hadn't ruined anything. It had revealed everything. He wasn't losing control. He was finally finding something real. 2 days after bringing the triplets into his home, Lucas Grant sat frozen in his office, a worn, faded backpack clutched in his hands like a relic too precious to disturb. The apartment, once an echo chamber of efficiency, was strangely still. Mason, Aiden, and Leo were out with Catherine, his longtime housekeeper, buying books, clothes, and maybe unknowingly time. Lucas had sent them off with a smile, and the promise of a surprise, never suspecting that the real surprise would come from the smallest pocket of that old dirt-stained backpack. He had unzipped it absent-mindedly, perhaps searching for a way to feel closer to them in their absence, or maybe chasing the curiosity of a man who had just begun to care. But what he found stole the breath from his lungs. Tucked inside, carefully folded, was a piece of thin, yellowing paper. The ink had slightly bled over time, but the handwriting was unmistakable. At the top, a name stared back at him in letters he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Nathan Grant, his brother. Lucas unfolded the letter with trembling fingers, reading line by line as if he were peeling away years of resentment and silence. The words weren't for him, they were for someone named Maria, a name Lucas didn't know but now understood. The boy's mother. Nathan had written with the desperate clarity of a man who had lost everything and was holding on to hope by a fraying thread. The letter spoke of plans to return, of regret over past mistakes, of promises whispered into the darkness. But it was the final line that shattered something deep within Lucas. If anything happens and I'm not there, tell them their Uncle Lucas will take care of them. That one sentence collapsed the wall Lucas had built around his heart. All these years he had believed Nathan had abandoned him, turned away from family out of bitterness or pride. After their fallout over the estate, Nathan had simply vanished. Lucas had buried that hurt beneath the distractions of business and ambition, convincing himself he was better off, that Nathan was beyond reach and maybe undeserving of reconciliation. But now, with those few trembling words on paper, Lucas saw everything differently. He rushed to the safe in his office and retrieved the only photo he had left of them together, a snapshot from their 20s, laughing with arms around each other on a San Francisco pier. Nathan's smile in that photo was the same one he now saw every morning on Leo's face. The quiet strength in Mason, the spark in Aiden, it was all Nathan. All of it. Lucas didn't wait. He called his private physician immediately, ordering a discreet DNA test. Earlier that morning, under the harmless guise of routine health checks, he had collected cheek swabs from each boy. Now he needed the truth. No delay, no denial. The results came hours later. The match was undeniable. Genetically, they were his nephews, his blood, his family. Lucas sank into his chair numb. His mind churned not with corporate forecasts or stock fluctuations, but with images of bruises, of small shoulders trembling in the rain, of 3 boys who had been thrown into the world with nothing but each other, and had somehow ended up on his doorstep. While he had stood behind podiums shaking hands with investors and being praised as a visionary, his own family had been suffering in silence, unnoticed and unprotected. And as if fate had timed it cruelly, Monica's play had already begun. He saw it in her eyes when she first noticed the boy's cold calculation masked as concern. To her, they weren't children. They were vulnerabilities, distractions, leverage. He logged into the company's secure internal server where executive board communications were archived. A new folder had appeared: Emergency Strategy Review. It wasn't even subtle. Monica had begun gathering support for an emergency leadership evaluation. Not an outright ousting, at least not yet. But Lucas had played corporate chess long enough to recognize the first move of a well-executed coup. She would frame it as care for the company, concern for his workload, a suggestion that perhaps the CEO needed a temporary leave of absence. All language designed to undermine him gently until the knife twisted. He could fight, rally the board members loyal to him, threaten to walk and take half the shareholders with him. He had power still. But as he stared at the photo of Nathan and then imagined the boys sleeping just down the hall, Lucas asked himself something he never had before: not can I win, but should I? When Catherine returned with the boys that evening, the penthouse was instantly filled with life, crinkling bags, laughter, footsteps on marble floors. Lucas tried to be present, tried to engage, but he was quiet during dinner, almost absent, and when the boys had gone to bed, Catherine approached him with that intuitive gentleness only someone who'd raised children could offer. "They're Nathan's," Lucas said without looking up. She didn't speak for a moment. Then a soft, "I know." "They don't know yet. They will. In time." Lucas nodded, his voice low. "They still flinch at shadows. I want them to feel safe before they learn everything. And the company, they'll try to push me out." She met his eyes. "Will you let them?" He didn't answer, because for the first time in his life he wasn't sure. Later that night, Lucas walked to the boys' room. The door was slightly ajar. Mason was sprawled sideways across the mattress, one arm dangling off the edge. Aiden snored softly, his arms wrapped around a new dinosaur plushie. Leo, always the smallest, clutched the worn teddy bear Catherine had found for him and slept curled into himself like he still didn't quite believe he was safe. Lucas stood there a long time, not as a CEO, not as a rescuer, but as an uncle, as family. As he turned to leave, Leo stirred and murmured, "Uncle Lucas." Lucas froze, the words hitting him with more force than any boardroom accusation. Yes, Buddy Leo didn't respond, just rolled over and drifted back into sleep. Back in his office, Lucas opened a blank document on his laptop. He didn't write a press release, not a rebuttal, just a message, a declaration, not of defense but of identity. A letter to Monica, to the board, to the world. He titled it, "Linesworth Crossing." And for the first time since his brother disappeared from his life, Lucas knew exactly where he stood and why. On a bleak afternoon, the unthinkable happened. Leo's trembling frame collapsed, his breathing shallow, his skin pale beyond worry. In an instant, the quiet domestic harmony Lucas had just begun to build shattered, revealing an emergency that transcended corporate battles or boardroom votes. Within minutes, they were rushing through traffic to the emergency entrance of Lakeview Children's Hospital. Panic clouded Lucas's chest. His carefully structured life was unraveling, and nothing mattered more than the fragile breath of his youngest nephew. The diagnosis was devastating pneumonia, complicated by aplastic anemia, a rare condition where the bone marrow fails to produce sufficient blood cells. Immediate treatment was essential, but the doctors cautioned that time was against them. When Dr. Patel suggested a bone marrow transplant, hope and fear collided in Lucas's mind. The best matches are usually siblings, but these weren't siblings, and the registry's wait list stretched on ominously. With a storm of uncertainty around him, Lucas blurted out, "Test me. Whatever it takes." The results arrived quickly. Lucas was a near-perfect match. The probability should have been impossible. As uncle not parent, his genetic link should have carried less compatibility. Yet, against all expectations, he was the match Leo needed. Dr. Patel explained gently that identical twins share nearly indistinguishable DNA, and though Lucas and Leo were not father and son, their uncanny genetic connection suggested a depth beyond explanation. Lucas felt the revelation settle in his bones. These boys were not just his nephews. To the medical world, he was as close as a father. The transplant was scheduled within hours. Lucas felt hollow with fear, with the gravity of giving a piece of himself to save a child. The medical coordinator's reassurances about low risks did nothing to steady him. He said goodbye that morning with a kiss on Leo's forehead, promising strength he did not feel. Inside the operating room, Lucas lay under sterile lights, the hum of machines in his ears. Days blurred into hours. Meanwhile, Monica, ever predatory, seized the moment. She presented their absence to the board as irresponsible neglect. With Lucas away, she argued the company needed stable leadership. Votes were cast, control shifted, and Lucas was stripped of his authority, all in one afternoon, while he lay vulnerable, giving life. But in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by IV lines, monitors, and faint beeps, a transformation occurred. Alex Grant, ruthless tech titan, the man who once prioritized stock price over supper, found that love demands sacrifice, not calculation. And as he lay under sedation, Leo's faint heartbeat became his compass. When Lucas awoke, he was fragile, but so was Leo. Tiny tubes taped to his arms, but alive and slowly improving. Catherine held vigil in the corner, silent and steadfast. Noah and Mason clung to his hand, terrified but hopeful. In that moment, the throne that once defined Lucas's identity dissolved. He realized nothing mattered more. The company he built felt distant, hollow. If leaving the boardroom meant saving a boy whose face mirrored his brother's legacy, he counted that as victory. The CEO title became less important than the man they called Dad in the hospital bed. In the following days, as Leo's color returned and his lungs cleared, Lucas navigated calls from investors and legal threats from Monica, even as his hand remained clasped in Leo's. He declined to fight back immediately. He'd won before with the life breathing under the sheets beside him. Weeks later, Monica's house of cards collapsed. Her maneuvering framed as concern was exposed as manipulation. Falsified documents and shadowy alliances unraveled. Lucas, despite his absence, was quietly reinstated. But he didn't rush back to business. Instead, he brought the boys dressed in crisp collared shirts to the meeting where his return was to be formalized. Leo, still frail, and his brother solemn, took seats beside him. There was no speech, just the silent message that love had triumphed over power. In the conference room's cold lights, colleagues saw something unprecedented. A man who could hold a blueprint in one hand and a family in the other, and knew instinctively which needed to stay whole. Later at home, Lucas lay with the triplets under a blanket fort, sharing a read-aloud story. Dad Leo whispered, voice soft with recovery, "You saved me." And in that moment, Lucas knew that love hadn't just defied power, it had reshaped him. 1 year later, the Grant residence no longer echoed with the sterile silence it once held. It now hummed with the familiar, beautiful chaos of life, a crayon-streaked wall. Here, a toy car abandoned under the sofa. There, laughter spilling from the kitchen at all hours. Lucas Grant's world had transformed not with fanfare or spectacle, but with the quiet, persistent presence of 3 small boys who reminded him every day that legacy was not defined by what you built, but by who you built it for. On the first anniversary of Leo's recovery, Lucas found himself standing at the entrance of the newly established Nathan Foundation for Lost Children, a sleek but warm building tucked between the lakefront and a bustling park on the north side of Chicago. The name etched in brushed steel shimmered under the spring sun. A year ago, it would have been another charitable arm for tax strategy. Today, it was sacred ground. He'd built it in memory of his brother in honor of the 3 boys who reignited his heart, and for every child who had ever waited too long for someone to notice them. The foundation specialized in legal advocacy, transitional housing, and family reintegration programs, offering what the boys had never received until that rainy night outside the diner. Inside, the main hall buzzed with volunteers, social workers, and families. There were hand-painted murals of city skylines intertwined with children's handprints, and in the center hung a framed letter, Nathan's final message. Visitors stopped often to read it. Some cried. Most left with a different posture, as if reminded of something they'd almost forgotten. Lucas didn't speak at the launch ceremony. Instead, he handed the microphone to Mason, now 8, standing tall in his pressed navy jacket. With a trembling voice and a bold heart, Mason read from a piece of paper he had written himself. "A year ago, we were just trying to survive. Now we get to live, and it's because someone didn't walk away." The crowd stood not in applause but in reverence. Back at home that night, Lucas sat on the porch while Aiden and Leo played catch on the lawn. Mason curled up beside him, head on his shoulder. The stars began to blink awake in the early dusk, and for the first time in years, Lucas allowed himself to rest in the stillness without guilt. Aiden ran up breathless. "Dad, did you see that throw?" Leo almost caught it. Lucas smiled. "I saw. He's getting stronger every day. He says he wants to be a doctor now." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, why to help people like you?" Helped him. That night, as the boys drifted off to sleep, Lucas walked room to room, adjusting blankets and switching off lights. In Leo's room, he paused watching the boy's chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm. Just 1 year ago, that rhythm had nearly stopped. And now, here he was, dreaming healing whole. In the weeks that followed, Lucas returned part-time to the helm of Grant Tech, but only under new terms. He dissolved the layers of bureaucracy that had insulated the company from its community. He merged the business with the foundation, ensuring a portion of annual revenue directly funded social impact programs. Profit, he told his board, is only one form of return. The others are harder to measure but far more valuable. He converted an entire floor of the corporate tower into a family resource center complete with a daycare education hub and legal aid desk. Monica, once the symbol of unchecked ambition, had long been removed from the company after an internal audit exposed her mismanagement. Her departure, once seen as a scandal, now felt like a cleansing. But Lucas never gloated. He never pointed fingers. His journey wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about becoming someone he could be proud of, someone his nephews could look up to, not because of his wealth, but because of his values. The media tried to frame the story in typical terms: billionaire, philanthropist, reinvents, legacy from boardroom to playroom, the redemption of Lucas Grant. But Lucas avoided interviews. His story wasn't for headlines. It was for the bedtime rituals, the science fair, projects, the scraped knees, and the whispered, "I love yous" when the lights went out. One day, Catherine approached him with an envelope. "This came in the mail for you." She said, her expression unreadable. Lucas opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph worn and sun-faded. It was of Nathan holding 3 newborn babies in his arms, smiling like the sun shone just for him. Behind him stood Maria, radiant, tired, and happy. A note was scribbled on the back: "If they ever find you, tell them we tried. We loved them every minute, even when we were scared." Lucas held the photo against his chest and closed his eyes. At the boys' school that spring, there was a father-child storytelling night. Each student brought a parent to read a favorite book aloud. The triplets insisted Lucas read The Little Prince. He didn't understand the choice until he reached the line. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." He looked at them then, 3 boys who had saved him more than he had saved them. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and juice boxes and construction paper stars, Lucas Grant understood the truth of legacy. It was never about what you left behind. It was about who you became while you were still here, and he was finally wholly here. A year after that stormy night on Michigan Avenue, Lucas Grant stood in the backyard of a modest but joyful home, far from the penthouse suites and glass conference rooms that once defined him. The spring air was thick with laughter, the kind only children can make unguarded, alive healing. Mason was teaching Leo how to fly a kite, while Aiden chased butterflies with a net far too small. Catherine set lemonade on the patio table, and Lucas, no longer the untouchable billionaire, watched his nephews with a fullness in his chest he had never known. His journey from a cold, calculating CEO to a present, fiercely loving guardian wasn't a tale of instant redemption. It was built day by day through difficult choices, broken illusions, and courageous decisions that asked more of his heart than his intellect. In saving 3 boys, Lucas had unknowingly saved himself. The silence that once filled his home had been replaced by bedtime stories spilled juice and whispered secrets that only fathers get to hear. The triplets, once starving and abandoned, now thrived. Mason had found a love for chess and carried himself with a quiet sense of justice that echoed his late father. Aiden, restless and wildly curious, was always building something, whether it was a Lego fortress or a science fair volcano. Leo, the youngest and most fragile, was now the most expressive. He painted constantly bright, wild colors and told everyone who'd listen that his dad had saved his life not just once, but every single day. The Nathan Foundation had grown to starting with legal advocacy for at-risk children and expanding into education, foster care reform, and a mentorship program led by former street children who had found their own voices. It wasn't a charity project. It was Lucas's true legacy. He had put systems in place not just to rescue, but to restore, ensuring that children who once had no future could now dream boldly. Grant Tech still bore his name, but it was no longer his life. Lucas stepped back from daily operations, choosing instead to shape the culture, advocating for work-life balance, parental support programs, and ethical leadership rooted in compassion. He understood now that building empires was meaningless if the people at the center of them were hollow. Leadership wasn't about dominance, it was about service. One late evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Lucas sat with the boys on the porch. Mason asked Uncle Lucas, "Do you think Uncle Nathan would be proud of us?" Lucas looked up at the stars, quiet for a moment. "He would be proud of you. And if he's watching right now, I think he's smiling. Because you're safe, you're loved, and you're changing the world." The boys leaned into him. Then arms tangled around his, and for a long time they just sat. No words, no distractions, just connection. That night, as Lucas tucked Leo into bed, the little boy looked up and whispered, "Promise you'll never go back to your old life." Lucas smiled gently. "I already did, Leo, and I brought back the only parts that matter." The story of Lucas Grant isn't just about wealth or rescue. It's about recognition of who we're becoming when no one's watching. It's about what we choose when the world demands we pick power, but our hearts beg for purpose. In every city, on every corner, there are stories like Mason's, Aiden's, and Leo's. Children waiting to be seen. People walking past. But once in a while, someone stops. Someone sees. And that moment, just one, can change everything. The lesson from this story is simple, but profound. Your greatest success isn't the empire you build, but the lives you touch along the way. True strength isn't measured in money, but in the courage to protect what's fragile. And love, real, stubborn, sacrificial love, can rewrite any legacy. How can we apply this today? Maybe it's checking in on a neighbor. Maybe it's choosing to forgive when pride wants revenge. Maybe it's pausing your own climb to lift someone else. These aren't grand gestures, they're human ones. And that's what the world needs more of. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you pause and reflect, we invite you to join us on this journey of sharing stories that heal, challenge, and uplift. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is what gives us the heart and fuel to create more stories like this. Stories that remind us that no life is too small to be seen, and no heart too far gone to be restored. Together, let's build not just content, but community.